everybody. Oh, the connection's unstable. Beautiful. So we've got a little bit of a funny situation going on here. The power is out. And so we, instead of being on the wonderful multiple desktops that we are usually running from, we are running everything from Matthew's computer, which I've never used before. So there's that. And then if we start to run out of power, we will switch to using my phone, which has like 64%. Anyway, so things are going to be a little bit chaotic and not as streamlined as they've been this time. A little bit more Herstory 1, if you will. But yeah, so that's what's going on. But anyway, welcome. Welcome to Herstory 2.0. That very small, wonderful clip that you were hearing was The Light is the Same by Reena Esmail, and performed by Saskatoon Symphony Orchestra's very own Mistral 5. We had intended to play the whole thing, but then we walked into the SSO and the power was out. So anyway, my name is Kendra Harder. My pronouns are she, hers. Thank you to the SSO for hosting this and to Mark Turner. And thank you to Matt for helping us out. I'll just give you, he'll be popping in a little bit to help me with the tech. So since he's right here, everyone say hello to Matthew. Yeah, it's gonna be a riot today, guys, or folks. Trying to change myself. Okay. So I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land where we are gathered and live streaming from is Treaty 6 territory, the traditional territory of the Cree, Dakota, Nakota, Dene, Saulteaux, and the homeland of the Métis. We pay respect to the Indigenous ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. We encourage you also to take a moment to consider the Indigenous land on which you reside and offer a sense of gratitude to the Indigenous peoples who stewarded this land and water long before us. So please feel free to put your name into the chat and whatnot. There won't be as much interaction back and forth since Matt isn't able to do that, but please do. We still want to know where you're from. We can still download those chats afterwards and be excited to know that you were here. And then as always, we'll try to have a question and answer period at the end of the class in the last 10 minutes. Okay, so very, very exciting news to share with you all. Next Wednesday, that is June the 16th, yes, at 11 a.m. we will be hosting a trans and non-binary composer and musicians panel. And so there we'll be hosting 4 different amazing artists. We will have Dr. C.N. Lester from the UK. We will have Inti Figgis Vizueta from the United States. We will have Camille Rogers from Toronto, but residing in Alberta, I think, right now. And Saskatoon's very own Respectful Child. And yeah, they'll be having a panel-led discussion and talking about their music and their lives as musicians, as trans and non-binary artists. So we invite you all to come to that. It is free. Yes, that's Wednesday the 16th at 11. We're also having Herstory, but this is something we're doing in addition to start expanding our knowledge. And yeah, that sentence went away with me. All right, so today's class is it's a bit of a hodgepodge of a concept. Well, it turned into a really good concept. But when I was coming up with the people I wanted to do for Herstory 2.0, I immediately knew that I wanted to do Tanya Tagaq. Like it was just, I am doing Tanya. And then I heard Reena's music and I was like, I am definitely doing Reena Esmail's music. But I had no idea what I specifically wanted to, like I had no theme in mind yet. But then as I was listening to both of their musics, it just dawned on me that, hey, they both have a collaborative element in their music and that they are combining their traditional musics with Western classical music. And so then I came up with this idea of like beautiful blends or a cool collaboration. But really the main feed is I just really like their music. And so we're going to talk about it. So the first person we're going to talk about is Tanya Tagaq, and I'm just having a little nerdy moment. These here two things are two of my programs because I got to see Tanya perform twice with the Saskatoon Symphony Orchestra, and she is so amazing when she performs. It's just like she envelops every, like, just this space, like you were just completely brought into this amazing world of sound and music. And yeah, it is amazing. I've always just, whenever I know she's coming to town to perform with the SSO, I'm like, I am there. I am getting a ticket. She is so amazing as a musician. But to this, so there's also this other kind of, I guess, controversy that happens with it, because there are some people that are not quite fond of the Inuit throat singing. And I mean, here's the thing, like everyone is entitled to opinions, right? Like some people love classical music, some people love opera, some people love metal music, some people love pop music. Like it doesn't matter if we don't all love the same music, it's all valid and wonderful and beautiful. But anyway, to that, after one of Tanya's concerts, I went to work the next day at the library, and some of the librarians were like, oh, that was something. And it just made me laugh a little inside, because I was like, that's the controversy we need. We need to kind of make the theater more exciting and more accessible and diverse and different. And then what I also loved is every time I've been to one of Tanya's shows, Centennial Auditorium has been sold out, and it's been a diverse crowd. Like it's not just the white Eurocentric crowd. It's like lots of people want to come and hear her, and that is exciting, that that Tanya brings such an amazing audience with her in her performances. Yeah, so those are my two little programs, and I'm just being a little like, woohoo. And also, it's cool to pack rat, and that's, yeah, one of the things. So who is this Tanya Tagaq that I am going on about? She is an Inuit throat singer, experimental musician, painter, and novelist. Her music has as much to do with electronica, industrial, and metal influences as it does with her traditional culture. Her concert tours will jump all over the map, from an EDM festival in Mexico to Carnegie Hall. And I love this little description of her from one of the SSO programs. This Inuk punk is known for delivery of fearsome elemental performances that are visceral and physical, heaving and breathing and alive. So Tanya was born 1975 in Cambridge Bay in Nunavut. Her mother is Inuk and was raised on Baffin Island, and her father is of British and Polish descent. Tanya grew up with two brothers, and she actually also attended a residential school in Yellowknife. And when I read that, it really hit me, because yes, I am very aware that the last residential school closed in the 90s in Saskatchewan, but to like see and meet people that have actually been, it just makes it so much more sad how, and how close this system is. Anyway, I think that's a very important thing to point out, that the residential school system is not just history, it is still affecting people's lives today. And this wonderful singer sadly had to also go to one of those schools. But she did end up completing her high school through correspondence in Cambridge Bay, because I believe I read somewhere that they didn't actually have an actual high school there in Cambridge Bay. So that's why she was in Yellowknife for a bit, and then later just, did it via correspondence. So growing up, Tanya listened to a lot of high quality exploratory music. Her father had a record player, so she would get to listen to Led Zeppelin, Boney M, Peter Tosh, the Beatles, like the Sgt. Pepper and the White Album, Jimi Hendrix, the Doors. And in this one interview with Tanya, she was talking about how much music makes her feel so much and so deeply. And I love this, in so many directions. So in the interview, she talks about how she's also very deeply affected by sound, saying she was so sensitive, whether it was the wind blowing or the cold, it would just make her feel so overwhelmed into so much emotion. So she loves how sound and music can just like embody you, and then also embody history. You can listen to the same piece of music 25 years apart, but it will feel differently. The music is the same, but you've changed. And she also loves how music can give you the sense of unity. And why I really loved this interview was that it really just showed how connected Tanya is to her music, which is precisely what I feel from her whenever she performs. It's just how connected she is to earth, to her music, to who she is. Oddly enough, though, she never intended to become a professional singer. She graduated with a degree in fine art from the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. And this is a really cool little tidbit. One of her oil paintings was selected for the cover of the 2003 Northwestel phone book. So while she was living in Halifax, Tanya received a cassette from her mom with 2 women throat singing. And this, it sparked her mind. She loved this. And so she got into developing throat singing by imitating the voices that she heard on the tape. And so later she began performing for her friends at parties. And so in 2000, she was at the Great Northern Arts Festival in Inuvik, Northwest Territories, where she was showcasing some of her paintings. But then one night at a campfire, she sang impromptu. And then she was later asked to perform at that festival. In that audience were some friends of the Icelandic singer Björk. And so they all told Björk about Tanya. And later Björk asked Tanya to join them on her upcoming tour. And eventually Tanya would go to record with her on the album Medulla. So Tanya's throat singing, though, she performs it differently than the traditional style, which is with 2 people. And Tanya performs as a solo artist. She uses her body and her voice equally as instruments. So traditional Inuit throat singing is an ancient vocal game, usually played by 2 women who stand face to face, producing trance-like guttural sounds. The singing is continuous and aided by circular breathing. There are also some sounds that are produced on exhalations, and then others that are on inhalations. For example, maybe on an exhalation, they'll have a low note, and then on an inhalation, a high note. And so then they echo one another, sort of almost like a half beat off. And so then when they're sort of going in rhythm together, it sounds like there's this continuous low and high pitch at the same time. But really it's 2 voices kind of, simultaneously creating these different notes and sounds. So then I guess how with the vocal games, the goal is to see which of the 2 women will lose their breath first or burst out laughing. So in Canada, though, throat singing had been prohibited by the Christian missionaries and was almost lost. These missionaries felt that it was non-Christian and non-white cultural practices. Boo. And so this art form was almost lost. But some elders began to rescue the ancestral custom by teaching it to younger generations who are now reviving the tradition. And this resurgence happened in about 1980 was when the resurgence of the vocal games was starting. So we're going to have a little listen here to Tanya performing as a solo artist, because the rest of the pieces that I've picked are actually a little bit outside of the things that she records on her albums. And so I really want you to get an idea of just hearing Tanya by herself and seeing what she does, because it is phenomenal. So we're going to call Matt over to help me with this bit.
As the light's getting darker and darker here.
I wish I had headphones in for that. It's so good. I love the low, whatever it is that she does. So good. So in 2005, Tanya released her debut album, Sina, which was Inuktitut for, I forget. I wrote it down and I deleted it. Good job. Anyway, but the next piece I'm going to talk, this one after this album, she kind of started taking the world by storm. So good. But the next piece I'd like to share with you is from her second collaboration with the American ensemble, the Kronos Quartet, which took place in 2015 via their 50 for the Future project. So David Harrington, the artistic director of the Kronos Quartet, says, "I've never heard a singer before who I felt had a string quartet in her throat the way that Tanya does. When I asked her to write 50 for the Future, she said, 'Well, I'm not really a composer.' And I said, 'Tanya, you are a composer. Just go into the studio and make a piece.' So she did just that." And I love that little quote because sometimes I feel in the classical world, we get really stuck up about what constitutes a composer and what doesn't constitute a composer. If you are writing music in any form, you are a composer. It doesn't matter what it's for, you are a composer. So I love this. And I'm so happy that David encouraged her to do this piece with them. So anyway, so she's more of an improvisational artist, as you will. And what Tanya has to say on improv is that improv is exactly how life is. It's totally uncontrolled. The moments that we've lived before and the ones we're living right now will never happen again. Whenever Tanya thinks about this, every moment then becomes so poignant. Ooh, a flashlight. Oh, yes, stand lights. Is that going to break your computer?
No.
Okay.
We'll make this work.
All right. So the piece that Tanya wrote for the Kronos Quartet is called Sivin Itini, which in Inuktitut translates to the future ones. And this comes from a poem that Tanya had written for one of her albums, and she thought was the perfect title for this piece. So her hope is to bring a bit of the land to future musicians. She writes, "There's a disconnect in the human condition, a disconnect from nature, and it has caused a great deal of social anxiety and fear, as well as a lack of true meaning of health and a lack of relationship with what life is. So maybe this piece can be a little bit of a wake up." So the Kronos Quartet then gave her this opportunity to take the sounds that are within her body and translate them to the body of an instrument. And so when I first heard this piece, I actually didn't read any of the program notes or anything like that. I just hit play because I was really excited. And the first thing I thought immediately was how this string quartet sounded exactly like Tanya's Inuit throat singing. And like there's some bow movements that even sound like an inhale. And I just thought that was so brilliant. So how this piece was birthed, I guess, Tanya went into the studio and she recorded her voice. And actually she has two voice parts that she creates. So when you listen to it, if you have headphones, it's excellent to listen to it this way because you get to hear both of them in different ears, both of Tanya's. And then what happened was Jacob Garchik of the Kronos Quartet, he transcribed and arranged it for the string quartet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do two little bits of recording back to back. The first is a vocal demo of what Tanya did originally in the studio. And then I don't think my time markers are precise, but where we sort of cut off this vocal demo will go into the string quartet version of it. It is so cool. If you don't have headphones, you could maybe get some while we set this up. So Tanya is, she is one that fights for the underdog. She's always wanted things to be better for people, and she detests when things are unfair in a non-natural way, i.e. colonialism. Just saying. So she says, well, you could say that her music is political. It's also about survival. When she realized that she and her daughter were 4 times as likely to be killed than any other demographic in Canada, it felt irresponsible for her to not do anything. So in 2014, her groundbreaking album Animism won the Polaris Music Prize. And so at that performance, she had the names of 1,200 names of missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada scrolling behind her. So I want to talk a little bit about the murdered and missing Indigenous women, because it directly translates into this last piece we're going to talk about by Tanya. So since the 1900s, there has been an epidemic of violence towards Indigenous women. In 2002, the Native Women's Association of Canada, NWAC, started lobbying the federal government to address this systemic violence against Indigenous women and girls. The Sisters in Spirit project created the first, and at that time only, database in Canada of missing and murdered Indigenous women, listing 582 cases. In 2016, the NWAC's 11-year campaign for a national inquiry into the missing and murdered Indigenous women was finally launched. This inquiry was urgently needed to raise awareness and understanding of the sexist and racist attitudes and beliefs that are at the root of the violence against Indigenous women in Canada. And there is overwhelming evidence that this violence is in part of an intergenerational impact of the residential school system. So I'm going to read here again this little excerpt that I read last week from Legacy of Hope about the residential schools, just in case any of you weren't here for that and don't know anything about the residential school system. So for over a century, beginning in the mid 1800s and continuing into the mid 1990s, right? It's like my brain says 10 years ago, but like 20 years ago. Aboriginal children in Canada were taken from their homes and communities and placed in institutions called residential schools. These schools were run by religious orders in collaboration with the federal government and were attended by children as young as 4 or 5 years of age. They were separated from their families and prohibited from speaking their native languages and practicing their culture. And the vast majority of the over 150,000 children that attended these schools experienced neglect and suffering. So on June 3rd, 2019, a final report of the inquiry was released. The report was, oh, there's something from Mark here. Oh, this is how it goes. Sorry. So the report was released, and the report found that Indigenous women and girls were 12 times more likely to be murdered or go missing than any other women in Canada, and 16 times more likely than Caucasian women. And the rate of violence against Indigenous women and girls continued unabated during the inquiry. There was a database compiled by Kristen Gilchrist Salles, who's a researcher who works with the Sisters in Spirit, found that there were at least 140 deaths that were the result of homicides, suspicious deaths, and deaths in police custody or while in the care of the child welfare system between 2016 and 2019. There was an RCM report released in 2014 and covering an earlier period determined that there were 1,017 homicides of Indigenous women between 1980 and 2012, revealing a rate of about 2.6 deaths a month. The inquiry found that the RCMP figures were likely an undercount of cases. So this is a huge deal. And Tanya wrote a piece that was a lament for these women, for these girls that have gone missing, that have been murdered. So this piece was called Quiksaktak, and in Inuktitut, it translates to grief. And it's a 5-movement orchestral work dedicated to the lives of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And so the movements are modeled after the Kubler-Ross stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And this piece is like collaboration at its core. It was composed by Tanya Tagaq, Christine Duncan, and Jean Martin, and orchestrated by Christopher Mayo. And so Christine Duncan, you'll get to see her in the recording. She's got pink hair and she's conducting alongside the other conductor. What she did was she created a sort of improv section for the brass section, and she has like these special hand cymbals and conducting things that she put together to help conduct this a little bit. And I remember at the performance, because this was performed in Saskatoon, so both Eric Pitcow and Christine Duncan were conducting on the stage. It was really, this was an amazing piece to see. Anyway, I digress. So Tanya then improvises a lament over these 5 movements. And this orchestra then acts as a container of sorts, which then gives Tanya the freedom to fully embody the emotional narrative that was composed there in plain sight. I love that phrase. This was a review from Muskrat magazine. It says, generations of women move through her as she becomes both wild tundra and animal. Tagaq's improvised throat singing honors the mothers, sisters, cousins, aunts, grandmothers, and great-grandmothers. So the recording I've been able to find is only a partial recording. And I believe it starts at about movement 3, which is where we're going to start from today. And this was the performance from the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. So here is Quiksaktak by Tanya Tagaq. that was Kisaktak. Please feel free to look for her other albums, Sinna, Animism, and Retribution. And you can also find a lot of her work on her SoundCloud page. So the next composer we're going to talk about, oh, how much time have we got?
It's 7:36.
Okay. Good, I'm going over. Oh, and it's anyway, so the next person we're going to talk about is Reena Esmail. And she works between the worlds of Indian and Western classical music, bringing communities together through the creation of equitable musical spaces. Her heritage is entirely Indian, but she still comes from this very diverse background. Her father is Muslim and her mother is Goan Catholic. And actually, between Reena and her parents, they speak 10 languages. So being both Indian and American, growing up, she found herself constantly navigating between these two cultures. The culture inside of her home was very different, like the one that she shared with her family, than that which she had with her friends in LA. And so as a child, she sort of learned to keep these two cultural worlds separate from each other, as most children of immigrants do. Yeah, this is quite interesting. When Reena started learning music at 8 or 9, she didn't even know that Indian classical music was a thing. It wasn't until her year when she was at Juilliard that she met an Indian classical musician. And we will get into that a little bit later. But back to Reena growing up. From the moment of her first piano lesson, she knew that she wanted to be a classical musician. She writes, "I was swept up in the ability to create beauty in the world, and also by the intense discipline it takes to become a classical musician." She had lots of classical music playing when she was growing up. Her parents listened to it. Her grandparents even had some LPs of some of Beethoven's symphonies and of Rubinstein playing Chopin. Her birthday gift in elementary school was a CD player, and her first CDs were Beethoven's Ninth Symphony as conducted by Ormandy, Anthea Gifford's recital at Cooten Court, and Cyprian Katsaris playing Chopin waltzes. So as a child, she always wanted to be a pianist, but she also really enjoyed being that person behind the scenes who was creating the music. She can't remember a time that she wasn't composing, but she didn't actually know it was a career option until her late teens. So she studied her Bachelor of Music at Juilliard School of Music. And as around the time she finished, she met Mosami Shah, a Hindustani singer. And what really impressed her about Mosami's music were the mellifluous ornamented melodic lines and the vivacity of rhythm, which she'd been struggling to express in her own music, seemed to be already so deeply developed in Hindustani music. So 5 years after this meeting, Reena started formally learning Hindustani music for herself. So in 2011, she received a Fulbright Nehru grant to study Hindustani music in India. She's had teachers kind of like there and in America, including Srimata Lakshmi Shankar and Gaurav Mazumdar. And currently, she is working and collaborating with Saley Oak, who is an amazing vocalist. And Reena considers her to be sort of her Hindustani counterpoint. And she just loves learning from her. So back to her Fulbright year. I won't talk too much about it, but I highly suggest finding her TED Talk. I have it linked on my website as one of my sources. And in there, she describes her experience in India. But while she was there, this was when her ears and her mind were really opened up to the Hindustani classical music and everything that was like possible inside of it. But leaving India after her Fulbright year was one of her most difficult moments. It was the first time that she became fully aware that she would spend the rest of her life trying to connect two countries that were on opposite sides of the world. So despite having been in India in 2011, 4 years later, gaining entry back into India would prove to be impossible. In 2015, after months of pleading with embassies and government officials, she lost the battle for the visa that she needed to return to India. And this was simply because her grandfather had moved the family to Pakistan in the 1950s after partition. So just a little tiny snip on partition for those of you who don't know. This was in August 1947. So after 300 years of the British being there, they finally left. But then the subcontinent was partitioned into two independent nation states. the Hindu majority India and the Muslim majority Pakistan. And with this partition of the subcontinent, there was a vicious civil war that occurred, like just brutal what was happening. And then there's also mass migrations in both directions for people. And so because of this, this is why she's not allowed, she wasn't granted this visa. I'm gonna have to skip ahead, but anyway, she writes, the pain of being from two places that is that wherever you are, you always miss the other place. But I love this. Whatever time the Indian government is willing to give me in this beautiful country, she'll make the most of it. Every day I spend in India is a blessing. Okay, never mind. I'm not going to skip ahead. I love this. While I might not ever be able to live in a physical world that contained everything that I loved and allowed me to be the fullest possible version of myself, I could at least try my best to create that world in the music that I wrote. So she, in one of the things I read about her, she talks about some of these like polar opposites that appear to be between Hindustani and Western music. You know, like one is improvised where the other is written. One is primarily a solo art where the other is kind of like massive ensembles. But because of these differences, the two don't really step on each other's toes. This I found was really interesting. So Hindustani music focuses deeply on melody and rhythm and has this degree of complexity that is not idiomatic to Western music because of the structure of the notation. Whereas this structure, this notation, there's harmony and counterpoint that are possible in Western music that is not possible in Hindustani music. So the music that she writes is about finding points of connection between these two traditions, allowing one tradition to exist in context of the other. So the piece I'm going to show you, storms, I love storms. The piece I'm going to share with you is this piece of hers called This Love Between Us. Beautiful. I'm just going to like go ahead and plug this album of hers that is of this entire piece, This Love Between Us. And also on that album is another piece by Barbara Kroll, who is an Adawa musician. And she also plays Pipagwan. She's done some, anyway, it's like the best album ever because you're thinking you're just going to get this amazing piece by Reena and then, oh, bonus, I get something by Barbara Kroll. Anyway, okay, buy the album. It's on iTunes. So This Love Between Us is a piece about unity. It's 7 movements that juxtapose the words of the 7 major religious traditions in India. So there's Buddhism, Sikhism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, Hinduism, Jainism, and Islam. And then the text that she chooses looks at how each religion looks at unity, brotherhood, and being kind to one another. So the text that she chose were either from canonical religious writings or from a poet who wrote in that religion's lens. Pardon me. So it's simultaneously in English, but then also in the original text language, with the exception of the Christian text, which is sung in Malayalam. And so her reason for this was so that you could grasp the beauty of the original text, but then also the translation. So this piece then also combines both Western and Hindustani music in the form of instrumentation and then what she writes as well. So it's scored for sitar and tabla with choir and Baroque orchestra. And so with this is something I found so cool. It was like one of the first things that caught my attention about Reena was that she creates audio guides to help her musicians. So she has for the singers, she does her own speaking through in like IPA or infonetic. International Phonetic Alphabet. And then she breaks down how to make the different sounds and how to pronounce things. But then this is really cool. She also has an audio guide, or what I'm calling an oral score for the sitar and tabla player, where she sings the lines to these different players in sargam, which is sort of like the Western solfege. And then also kind of gives them some cues like play this bandish for this many measures, and then you'll hear this and then come in and improvise, like those sorts of things. And then what she also has is, this is the part that got created sort of in process of the first performance, and it's an intermediary to have between the traditional Hindustani musicians and the Western musicians. And so the first time it was actually Reena herself who did it. So it's just to kind of help to cross cue between the different people. And I have, yeah, so this is, I got to email Reena and hear back from her. So this is something she wrote to me. So suffice it to say, there was quite a large musical chasm between the Hindustani and Western musicians when we started performing the work. But because of my dual training, I was able to fill in the gaps until the musicians could feel how to embody the new space themselves. But that is the role I love. I love being the intermediary. I love being a musical translator and being able to simultaneously work in both traditions. Over the years, I've begun to understand where the easiest musical connection points are, and I've pushed myself even further. The score also has lots of improvisational sections in it for the sitar and tabla players. You know, and that sort of scared me as a composer because I'm so controlling. I'm like, I need to know how it's going to sound. I need to know what's going to happen, and it would change if it was improvised. So this is what Reena said to that. I create these sections usually by figuring out a background texture and then improvising a few times over it myself. Once I know that there is one possible path through it, I trust that there will be many other possible paths, and I'm happy to leave it to the performers. I'm usually surprised in the other direction. I'm almost embarrassed by how much more creative an actual Hindustani musician can be in those passages because their knowledge is so deep and their ability to respond in the moment so much more trained. So she writes that it's also really important to her that she embodies the Hindustani music properly, because if it's the first time that a Western audience hears music, she wants them to get music from the place of deep understanding from her. But then it's also important that Indian audiences would like it as well, because if they can't connect to it, she's not doing her job. So the little excerpt we're going to listen to is from the last movement of This Love Between Us. And it's the seventh movement called Islam. And I love the text. This is the English oh no, I think it is, I don't know the original. But so it says, the lamps might be different, but the light is the same. Concentrate on the essence, concentrate on the light. And just a full disclosure, we have to like just cut it off somewhere ugly. And I'm so sorry. There's just no good place to stop. So when Reena began her career as a composer in 2001, she never imagined that she would be connecting these two musical cultures that make up her identity and creating environments in her music where both sides can make music together. She writes, I see this as an immense opportunity and also an immense responsibility. If I am the first woman composer someone knows, if I am the first Indian composer they know, then I have the power to engage someone and perhaps provide that missing perspective. If there is very little context for people who look like me and do the work that I do, I hope that by providing that context, I can change minds and open hearts, one person at a time. So Reena is currently the artistic director of Shastra, which is a nonprofit organization promoting cross-cultural music, connecting the music traditions of India and the West. And with this, they also showcase the diversity of the Indian Western crossover that exists today. And so this was co-founded by Reena and Peyton McDonald, who is a percussionist and a Deerpod singer. For her doctoral degree from the Yale School of Music, she wrote a doctoral thesis on the methods and challenges of the collaboration process between Hindustani musicians and Western composers. And so strengthening this relationship between the two worlds is one of the most important parts of Reena's career. She's actually currently in the process of creating a crossover methodology that teaches some of the basic principles that are in her music. And so then this can help people come with a little bit of groundwork already laid from both sides. So she writes, but this is my life's work. So I'm more than happy to do whatever it takes to make the process more enjoyable. The goal is to allow each musician to feel comfortable enough in my piece to be able to show their best work, but also to feel like they're able to reach across traditions because of that strong grounding in their own tradition. So to end the class, I found some very incredible pieces of writing by Reena, and I kind of want to bring a little bit of them forward here, because I think they just brought up some very interesting and good points. But I'm going to begin with talking a little bit about Robert Gross's op-ed regarding women composers. It's the patriarchy, stupid. And in there, he mentions how in terms of composition competitions or in hiring composers in academia, he's witnessed men who are frustration when they don't get the commission or the hire. And then they would uniformly and summarily dismiss the success of women or minority composers in academia. And they'd say, oh, diversity hire. So Robert says, when frustrated, instead of assuming their own inferiority of their own work, they say that women's work, African Americans' work, Asians' work is a diversity hire, as if it was only given out of some sort of stage of politically correct or active affirmative action. Sorry. So by not properly taking this rejection, like that is just so terrible. Like, also, who cares if it's a diversity hire? They're awesome, and that's why they got the thing. And we should have more diverse things. Anyway, we'll get into Reena's thoughts on this. But he says, when you don't take that, so Robert says, when you don't take that rejection, it's dangerous, because when you pass something off as a diversity hire, you stop listening to the music and you stop giving the music a fair chance. And so here's something that Reena wrote that I love. Prejudice often stems from a lack of perspective. Sometimes when I tell people that I'm a composer, I see the disbelief in their eyes as they think to themselves, you don't look like a composer, or, oh, how sweet, she thinks she's a composer. I don't blame them for their first reaction. They are just responding to so many years of cultural conditioning that tell them that professional composers don't look at me. So, I jumped ahead in my brain. So additionally, kind of back on Robert's bit here, like women composers and composers of color, trans and non-binary composers should not only be relegated to those diversity hire spots. They deserve their own place in academic positions, high-ranking commissions, in textbooks, right? And so here's this. I love this. This is so good. This is Vina Ismail. Being represented is just the beginning. It is the very least we can do. I want to be clear. Women and minorities are fully aware that they are just as capable and creative as the people in the majority. But when they don't see themselves represented, it just conveys to them that our field is still too biased to accept them, and that perhaps they should take their talents elsewhere. We are simply losing talent by not demonstrating to our youngest creators that we are capable of fostering their voices at all levels. This is good. She also writes, I also think we should be moving past the ideas of diversity and inclusion and into the idea of equity. Inclusion still implies a hierarchy. Diversity still feels like it can stop at cosmetic solutions. But I've been so fortunate to work with many organizations who truly partner with minority groups to put their voices front and center, to move beyond simply stuffing them into an already existing structure, but to restructure their practices inspired by the people that they are partnering with. This is how we move past minority groups feeling like they are being recruited for the purpose of metrics, and how truly sustainable relationships begin. Isn't that so good? I love her. And with that, questions. Are there any? All right. So Carol asks, will you send us an invite? I assume you are talking about the trans and non-binary panel. Matthew?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Oh, sorry.
That will come out in an email on Tuesday with the update of the next class. So it'll be a dual email that people can receive. Invite not only for the information of next and last Herstory 2.0 class, but also the panel discussion that will take place next week. So watch out for next email. It'll include both things for you there.
All right. Answer live. Oh, let's see here. So Kelly asks, Kendra, what are your thoughts on the throat singing controversy with Tanya and Carolyn Shaw? I do not know about this controversy. Could you type me a little bit about this? Oh, wait. Is that the thing where she used it in like some choir stuff without permission? Was that the thing? Aha, here we go. All right, from Wiki. Excellent. Thank you, Kelly. On October 29th, several performers of Tagaq, which is Inuit throat singing, including Canadian Inuit throat singer Tanya Tagaq, accused Carolyn Shaw and Roomful of Teeth of having engaged in cultural appropriation and exoticism for the perceived uncredited quotation of a Tagaq song in the third movement of Partita. In a public statement released by Carolyn Shaw and artistic director Brad Wells, Roomful of Teeth acknowledged that they had hired and studied with Inuit singers in 2010, and the techniques learned from those studies had been used in Partita. They further stated that they believed those patterns to be sufficiently distinct from Tagaq. Yes, I actually do remember reading about this. It's hard for me to speak on these things as somebody who is a white person, and that's because it's not my culture that's being appropriated. I think what I remember reading, though, was that Roomful of Teeth did offer an apology, and then I think they went on to collaborate more with individuals. I think what's most important is that if you are going to use other cultures, is that you definitely collaborate with those people, like give them the work as well, work with them. But yeah, for me as a white person, I find it really difficult to talk on those things because I don't know what it's like to have my culture ripped away from me and then suddenly being brought up by people now. But I think what's most important is that you are at least working together with those cultures. All right, Here's something. So Susan writes, David Harrington and Tanya are a good combination. I had an opportunity to chat with David and his 50 for the Future project when he judged at Bisquick, sorry, pronunciation problems. He's a great thinker about expanding quartet music beyond the old dead and white European composers. Also, I've seen Tanya perform with the ESO and it was mesmerizing. Yeah. Where's that question box? Here we go. All right, well, I think it's 8 o'clock. I'll leave a little bit more time if people want to type some more questions in there. And I'll listen to the rain. Oh, I love rain, you guys. And thunder, so good. All right, well, I think that's all we've got for questions. So once more, I'll just remind you all about the panel next week. I'm so excited. I'll be there, but very much not in a front capacity, because this panel is about lifting up the voices of these individuals. So they will be sort of self-leading it. It's going to be so good. Will the panel be available for replay? I believe for about up to a week is where we've landed. Yeah. So yeah, it'll be there for about a week. And yeah, but then there's also one more Herstory class. So don't think Wednesday is the only time you get to see my beautiful face. You can see me the next day and we'll talk about opera. And I'm so excited. Like, it's probably going to go over because I love talking about opera. And then, yeah, and then after that, I'll be writing an opera and you won't see me for like 8 months and it's going to be awesome. Anyway, thank you all for tuning in and bearing in with our impromptu studio creation during this power outage. We hope you all have a great week and we will see you next week. All right, adios.